You think if the NBA was 2 months away from starting their season, the NBA that's in bed with Disney, ABC, ESPN, that they wouldn't tell their networks to start talking about their league to get the word out to the public of what's going on? You don't think they'd start pushing propaganda because they have so much money to lose if there's no
2 months away from the season, the league that just had its biggest year in history, and the networks that paid billions for broadcast rights are completely silent. No Stephen A. Smith segments, no Colin Cowherd takes, no first take debates, nothing. That's not an accident, that's a message.
But why aren't they doing that with the WNBA? Why aren't they so worried and concerned that propaganda needs to be put out there to save the WNBA season, to put some pressure out there publicly? The only pressure we see are from content creators. You know, we got Andy Costabile from All the Sports. Yeah, ESPN puts out a couple articles. But as far as like media goes, mainstream media, your Stephen A. Smiths, your Colin Cowherds, First Take, Jason Whitlock, First Things First with Nick Wright. As far as shows like that are concerned,
think about what he's saying here. ESPN is literally in bed with the WNBA through their parent company, Disney. They have massive financial exposure if this season doesn't happen. But they're not pushing their talent to cover the CBA negotiations. They're not manufacturing urgency. Compare that to how they'd handle an NBA or NFL lockout. Wall-to-wall coverage, countdown clocks, emergency panels. The contrast tells you everything about how they actually value this league.
ESPN's silence on this matter kind of shows me they're indifferent about whether there's a season or not. They think that they can just throw something else in that time slot. They're not too much to lose if there's no WNBA season.
And there it is. Caitlin Clark's name gets mentioned when they're ranking basketball stars, but the league she plays in, the collective bargaining agreement that could cancel her second season, radio silence. They'll use her for clicks and ratings, but they won't advocate for the league itself. That separation is deliberate.
The conversations that a league like, if the NFL was months away from a lockout and the season was about to start, you think ESPN would be quiet about an NFL lockout? Not one bit. Let's get right into it. Please like the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
This is the critical insight. If ESPN believed the WNBA was essential to their programming strategy, they'd be manufacturing content right now. They'd be creating urgency, applying pressure, getting both sides on air to negotiate publicly. Instead, they're acting like a network that's already moved on, like they've got backup plans for those time slots and aren't particularly worried about losing WNBA inventory. The business reality here is stark. When the NBA faced potential work stoppages, ESPN devoted entire shows to coverage because billions in revenue were at stake. The WNBA's media deal, while historic for women's sports, represents a fraction of that exposure. ESPN can absorb a lost WNBA season without significant financial damage. The players, they can't.
Executive sending out a warning to the WNBA players. The league's not going to take this. If there is a deal that is proposed that does not favor the league, that does not benefit the league is not going to take this. The owners need to, the players need to understand that. The players need to realize that. The owners aren't going to take this deal.
This is where it gets interesting. A former Major League Baseball executive, someone who's actually negotiated these deals, who understands the leverage dynamics, is issuing a public warning to the Players Association. David Sampson ran the Miami Marlins. He's been on the ownership side of labor negotiations, and he's telling WNBA players something they apparently don't want to hear. You don't have the leverage you think you have. The timing of this warning matters. We're getting close to decision time, and the gap between what players want and what owners will accept remains enormous. Sampson isn't speaking as a fan or a media personality. He's speaking as someone who's seen how these negotiations actually end.
Of late, arguably the biggest talking point in women's basketball has been the never-ending negotiations between the WNBA and the Players Association over a new collective bargaining agreement. While both sides have shown some willingness to compromise over recent weeks, there still exists a comprehensive distance between an actual agreement. In the midst of it all, former Major League Baseball executive David Sampson has claimed that the Players Association may have to accept that WNBA owners have the advantage, and an agreement will only come as a result of a strike or a compromise on their end.
Let's break down what he's actually saying here. The Players Association has shown willingness to compromise. They've moved their revenue-sharing request down from earlier positions. But Sampson's point is that compromise means nothing if it's still not in the ballpark of what economically viable. Moving from an impossible ask to a slightly less impossible ask doesn't create a deal. Here's the specific breakdown. The Players Association's latest proposal calls for roughly 27.5% of gross revenue, starting at 25% in year one, with a salary cap below $9.5 million. The league's projections show that proposal would generate approximately $460 million in cumulative losses over the life of the agreement. $460 million in losses. That's not a negotiating position, that's a non-starter. No business accepts a deal that guarantees nearly $500 million in losses. It doesn't matter how much you believe in the product or the mission. At some point, basic economics have to apply.
And by strike, he means the players strike and they just bleed out of money and they come back to the table and accept the deal. Quote, will there be a compromise at the 11th hour? You certainly would like to think so, but a compromise that is not weighted toward the owners is not going to happen.
This is the fundamental disconnect. The Players Association wants to count one-time revenue events, expansion fees, relocation fees, broadcast signing bonuses as part of ongoing revenue-sharing calculations. That's not how business viability works. You don't build a sustainable salary structure on one-time windfalls. Expansion fees get paid once, then they're gone. You can't commit to annual salary obligations based on money that doesn't recur. Sampson's guarantee that no deal gets done under these terms isn't bluster, it's math. If players insist on counting non-recurring revenue as part of the revenue-sharing formula, owners will simply walk away. They'll cancel the season, absorb the short-term pain, and wait for economic reality to bring players back to the table.
He also mentioned in this podcast that if you're the players and you're the owners, well, the owners see that the air is falling out of the balloon. Falling out of the balloon. You guys understand. The owners see that a lot of the excitement around the league has dwindled. The owners see that. The players are stuck in their own little balloon, their own little bubble. They think it's all roses and daisies outside still. The owners see a different picture.
Now here's where the narrative gets complicated. There's been reporting that the Players Association initially asked for 50% of revenue, then 40%, before coming down to the current 27.5% position. If that's accurate, it shows massive movement from the union. Coming down from 50 to 27 represents real compromise. But here's the problem with that framing. If you start negotiations by asking for something completely detached from economic reality, something you know will never happen, then compromising down to something that's still economically unviable isn't really compromise. It's just moving from impossible to merely unrealistic. And there's another issue. The 50% and 40% figures haven't been widely reported by mainstream outlets. If the Players Association really started that high, why aren't we seeing that documented by ESPN, The Athletic, or other major sports media? Either those numbers are accurate and major outlets missed the story, or they're being introduced now to make the current ask look more reasonable by comparison.
Package Caitlin Clark. It's only going to come around once in a lifetime. This is the one time, because 30 years proved it's not coming. The former Miami Marlins president claimed that the players' demands simply do not fall in line with the business plan of WNBA franchises, and any deal will not be straightforward simply because of the nature of the payments that the Players Association continues to demand. Quote, when the Players Association wants to say to owners, you're having expansion fees, relocation fees, you're getting a one-time signing bonus from your broadcast partners, all of those one-time events.
Let's look at what the league is actually offering, because context matters. Under the owner's framework, the 2026 salary cap would jump to roughly $5.65 million, up from about $1.5 million in 2025. That's nearly a 400% increase in 1 year. Maximum total compensation, including revenue sharing, could reach around $1.3 million in 2026 and approach $2 million by 2031. Compare that to the current supermax of $249,000 and an average salary around $120,000. Those are massive increases. Life-changing increases for most players in the league. The league is offering to quadruple the salary cap and increase max salaries by more than 500% over the length of the deal, plus guaranteed housing, which eliminates one of the biggest expenses players currently face. So when Sampson says the players need to compromise, he's not saying they should accept crumbs. He's saying they need to recognize that a 400% salary cap increase is already a historic deal. Pushing for more, pushing into territory that creates $460 million in losses, isn't negotiating. It's demanding owners subsidize the league beyond any reasonable business model.
Fees and expansion fees as part of going forward revenue, the more I guarantee there will not be a deal to be done. In other words, the players are clueless. They want something that they're not entitled to. Still, the latest counter proposal from the Players Union reflects movement. The Players Association lowered its revenue sharing request to an average of roughly 27.5% of gross league revenue, beginning at 25% in year one, alongside a proposed salary cap below $9.5 million. That marks a significant step down from the union's earlier ask of 31% gross.
This is the leverage calculation that matters. The players think they're negotiating from strength because of last season's ratings bump and the Caitlin Clark effect. But here's what they're missing. That was one season, one anomaly. And a huge chunk of that success was tied to a single player who's now injured and will miss most or all of the upcoming season. The owners see something different. They see 30 years of losses before Caitlin Clark arrived. They see a league that required continuous subsidy from the NBA just to survive. They see one great season driven primarily by one player, and now that player is sidelined with an ankle injury. From the owner's perspective, this isn't the time to bet big on sustained growth. This is the time to lock in a deal that protects against regression to the mean. That's why ESPN's silence is so revealing. If the network believed the Caitlin Clark boom was sustainable and represented a permanent shift in WNBA viability, they'd be fighting to save this season. They'd be pressuring both sides to make a deal. Instead, they're quiet. They're acting like a network that thinks the boom might have been temporary and isn't sure the product justifies the investment without that one special player.
Maximum total compensation, including revenue sharing, could reach around $1.3 million in 2026 and approach $2 million by 2031, compared with a 2025 supermax of $249,000 and an average salary around $120K. That, in addition to the Players Association's demand for guaranteed housing, means that despite the ticking clock, further compromise from the Players Association may be inevitable, just as Sampson projects. The players need to compromise, not ask for okay, well, they said no to 27.5%. What about 26, owners? What about 26? 26? Going once, going twice? Oh, damn. They shot that down too. All right, they shot down 26. All right. What about 25? 25 going once, no? Oh, man. That's not moving the needle. That's not moving the needle. Let's just say the owners are willing to budge a little bit. You need to come down to like sub 20% maybe. Maybe you can stop at 20 and then start meeting around that 17% mark, if that's even a possibility. But you saying you want more than 20%, I just don't think that's happening. And if I don't take that seriously, if Mark Cuban doesn't take that seriously, if David Sampson doesn't take that seriously, if all these people that have been involved in sports leagues and team building and team ownership don't take that seriously, how can you expect the league and the owners to take that seriously? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I appreciate all the support.
So let's talk about what happens next, because we're running out of time for a deal that saves the season. The Players Association has a fundamental choice to make. They can continue pushing for revenue sharing in the high 20s percentage-wise, which means no season and no paychecks while they wait for owners to cave. Or they can recognize that a 400% salary cap increase, guaranteed housing, and max salaries approaching $2 million represents a transformational deal that changes players' lives even if it doesn't match what they believe they deserve. Here's the uncomfortable truth that David Sampson is trying to communicate. Deserve doesn't matter in labor negotiations, leverage matters. And right now, the owners have it. They can survive a canceled season. Most players can't. The owners can wait. The players can't. The owners have alternative revenue streams and business interests. The players have WNBA salaries and overseas contracts that pay better anyway. That leverage imbalance means the deal gets done on the owner's terms or it doesn't get done at all. Moving from 27.5% to 26% to 25%, that's not going to close the gap. The players need to think about coming down to the high teens or low 20s, somewhere that creates a sustainable business model instead of guaranteed losses. And here's where it gets personal for players. If you're a veteran making close to the current max, the league's offer potentially gives you $1 million+ per year within a couple seasons. That's generational wealth for most families. That's financial security. That's the ability to retire after your playing career without needing overseas contracts or second jobs. Is it worth risking that minus, worth canceling a season and losing a full year of earnings to push for a few more percentage points that might not be economically viable anyway? The Players Association leadership needs to ask themselves a hard question. Are they negotiating for the best deal players can actually get, or are they negotiating for the deal they wish existed in a different economic reality? Because those are two different things, and confusing them could cost players an entire season of their short careers. Look at the pattern here. The league has moved significantly on salary cap, max salaries, and housing. Those are real concessions that address players' biggest quality of life concerns. What the league won't do is accept a revenue-sharing formula that guarantees massive losses. That's not a negotiating position that will change with more pressure or more time. That's a hard economic line. So the question becomes, do players accept a historic increase that transforms their earning potential, or do they hold out for an idealized deal that might not exist? Do they take 400% salary cap growth and guaranteed housing, or do they risk everything on getting to 30% revenue sharing? David Sampson's warning is clear. The owners aren't bluffing. They'll cancel the season, they'll wait out the players. They'll come back next year or the year after with a similar offer, and by then players will have lost multiple years of earnings and the Caitlin Clark momentum will be gone. The air will be completely out of the balloon, and ESPN's silence confirms it. If the network thought this season was crucial, if they believed the WNBA's growth trajectory was locked in and sustainable, they'd be all over this story. They'd be manufacturing urgency and pressuring both sides to make a deal. Instead, they're acting like a network that's already written off the season and moved on to other programming. That should terrify the Players Association. Because if your own broadcast partner doesn't think your season is worth fighting for, what does that tell you about your leverage? The clock is ticking, the gap remains enormous, and the side with the leverage is making it clear they're comfortable walking away. So what do the players do now? Do they recognize reality and take a transformational deal, or do they bet everything on leverage they don't actually have? Because here's what we know for certain. 30 years of history says the WNBA doesn't work without continuous subsidy. One great season driven by one generational player doesn't erase that history, and that player is now injured and might miss the entire season that's currently in jeopardy. The owners see all of that. They're not negotiating based on what the league could be in an ideal world. They're negotiating based on what the league has actually been for 3 decades, a business that loses money and requires external support to survive. Until that fundamental reality changes, the owners hold all the cards, so the players can keep pushing for 30% revenue sharing and watch the season disappear. Or they can take the historic increases on the table, prove the league can sustain growth beyond the Caitlin Clark effect, and negotiate from actual strength in the next CBA cycle. Those are the options, and time is running out to choose.